All right, guys, thank you so much for coming today. I know some people probably travel from far and why we are recording this. So, thank you and appreciate for everybody coming out here.
Yes, please get your notebooks out.
For the New York City Committee for NYC GPA. And a lot of people, feel free. We're going to be doing some intros, tell everybody who they are, and we're going to take a 10-minute, last 10 minutes will be like a Q&A. So if you have any questions, and also, since we are recording this, it would be really helpful so that people can get some answers that they may not even, have questions to yet. So we are just going to go through this line first, and we're going to just do some introductions. Like I read, this is going to be focused on banking, accounting, and point of sale. So we'll start with Anne.
First of all, let's give a round of applause to Vanessa for organizing such a great event. Thank you, Vanessa.
And also our committee. We have
And the NYC committee, NYC GPA, life-changing. If you're not a member yet, highly recommend that you join. Do we have any prospects here, or are these members?
These are all members.
Oh, okay. Never mind then. Those of you who don't know, hello, my name is Anne, Head of Strategic Growth here at Dutchie. Dutchie, we are an all-in-one dispensary tech platform. So what that means is that we provide point of sale, inventory management, reporting, integration with the state tracking system to keep you compliant, payments. We just started selling insurance, so just think of us as your one-stop shop turnkey solution for all your dispensary needs. We work with over 5,000 dispensaries all across North America. Myself particularly, I've been in the cannabis tech space for almost 6 years now, which, as most of you know, is like 60 years in cannabis years. So super excited to be here today. So thank you.
And Anne is also from Dutchie, so Dutchie is hosting this wonderful gathering. So all the food and drinks will be provided by Dutchie. So Nick, go ahead.
First off, thanks Vanessa, Dutchie, for having me. I am Nick Agrippino from Bowers & Company. We're a full-service accounting firm in Syracuse, New York, based out of mainly. I am the Director of Cannabis Services at the firm, and then I also serve at the NYC GPA as a member of their Policy Advisory Panel.
Awesome. Peter, and if you guys could just speak into the microphone just so that we can get the recording. Thank you.
I think that was directed at you. Peter Sue with Green Check Verified. I was a longtime banker, about 25 years in banking. At my last couple of stops, I ran cannabis banking programs. With Green Check Verify, I now administer just over 100 cannabis banking programs all over the country. Notice I said was banker, so I'm taking advantage of the fact I don't have to wear a suit anymore. Like this guy.
Okay, Erica.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. My name is Erica Edwards and I am the owner of the Number Grinder Inc. We specialize in bookkeeping and accounting services for the cannabis industry. And I also co-founded a nonprofit for other cannabis accountants called New York Consortium of Cannabis Accountants, just so that we can all be a resource for each other in this crazy industry.
Awesome. All right. So we're going to start with accounting, and then we're going to go through banking and then to POS. So this is just a curated, list of questions that we got from a lot of the attendees and people who couldn't make it who wanted to ask questions and things like that. So what I wanted to do with the accounting first is that if you guys have, specifically Nick and Erica, like anything specific that you think is relevant or to highlight right now that people, opening businesses, and what are the maybe like top 2 things that you think that they should, really think about or is relevant to them right now?
Want me to go?
Go ahead, you go.
All right. I think something to keep in mind when you're talking to accounting firms is, make sure they're going to be an extension of your management team. That's going to be really important in this industry, where, it's not like a lot of other industries where it's just, hey, I see you once a year and I'm going to do your tax return, right? It really needs to be a hand-in-hand, approach, maybe even helping making management decisions and things like that. And then also, kind of going off of that, make sure it's someone who's sort of up to date, on things that are going on in New York State. Just because, hey, how do you put together a financial projection or, scope out your cash flows when you don't really know like the timeline of things that are happening in New York State right now?
Okay. Sure. Well, the big thing for me, I always say, even if people do know, is 280E, IRS code 280E. If you're not familiar, it is the code that states if you're participating in the trafficking of a Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 drug, that you cannot deduct normal business expenses when filing your taxes. So that's one thing to always keep in mind. And if you're dealing with accountants or bookkeepers that aren't familiar with 280E, then they need to get up on that. And I would say also to deal with people that you trust, and that's a huge thing, because I can look at someone's bank statements and their financial statements and I could see what's going on. I could tell if you're lying, but you should definitely deal with people who you trust and that you're going to tell everything to. That's super important.
Great. All right, well, let's start on the questions that we have received. So, what accreditation or background should you look for in an accountant that says they specialize in the cannabis industry?
Accreditations, there's a lot of people in this industry, especially in the bookkeeping services, that, a CPA is not necessarily required. But when it comes to if you need to be represented, before the IRS under an audit, that's kind of a good thing to have. Kind of goes hand in hand with attorneys and things like that. So that's one accreditation. It's kind of also with that, it's, I don't think that there's a lot of accounting directed accreditations right now in the industry. But, hopefully we'll see those soon too.
Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, there's definitely education programs out there and seminars, but it's not like 100% necessary, or to say that just because someone took a webinar that they know more than someone else. It's definitely on experience and knowing who you're working with.
Right. All right. As for 280E, does New York have a law in place for accommodations for adult use cannabis cultivators?
Yes. So New York State decoupled from 280E. You mentioned it earlier that it prevents a lot of businesses from deducting expenses that any other business in another industry could deduct as ordinary and necessary business expenses. Thankfully, New York State decoupled from that. That's a huge mistake that a lot of other states, especially California, the only state that taxes higher than New York State does. It took them 5 years, I think, to get that done. So I think the industry is kind of still recovering from that.
All right. Regarding 280E for farmers, can buildings, tractors, and repairs or of such be written off as cost of goods sold if the farm is only growing cannabis, THC cannabis?
You go ahead. You can say it.
Yeah, so cannabis companies have to use different counting methods than other businesses can use. The first thing that's a big hit with cannabis companies is a lot of other industries you can write off a lot of when you go and buy a piece of machinery or a tractor. A lot of that's a first year write-off where you can write off, even though you're paying for it over 5-10 years, you can write that all off in the first year. Cannabis companies don't have that luxury. They don't qualify for bonus depreciation, which is that 100% write-off. And then on top of that, you have to depreciate it over your useful life. And then that also gets wrapped into what's called your inventory cost. So even then, even if you can take a little bit of a chunk of that depreciation, you're not ultimately getting the deduction for that until you sell the product that that depreciation is related to.
Do you have anything to add? Okay.
Well, I would just add that it depends on who you're working with. I know a lot of people, can get very conservative when, dealing with what you consider cost of goods sold, what's fixed assets, what's you could depreciate. So it's your team and talking over what's best for the company and the methods that you're using. I mean, definitely follow GAAP, but it's, dealing with different costing, it does depend on your team.
So this is from someone, they said, I know that greenhouses can be depreciated like equipment in New York State. What is the best resource to understand write-offs and deductions that are specific to New York State and cannabis?
As far as that goes, it's important under GAAP, it's basically depreciated under a useful life. So there's some flexibility with that, say take a greenhouse, for example, it might depend what tarp you put over that greenhouse. What is the useful life of that tarp? Well, that could be different. So, you could develop a standard of, what you're depreciating these things, but it's really, it's a matter of a conversation and figuring out, hey, what is the actual useful life of this asset?
This is kind of a question for both accounting and POS. If we want to sell non-THC products like CBD accessories, CBD beauty products, do we have to set up a separate corporation but have it under the same location? That's for the accounting side.
You don't necessarily have to set up a new corporation. You can, but it should be tracked separately. So when getting receipts, you should probably have a separate bank account and keep everything separate that way, for sure.
Okay. Can a cannabis POS system like Dutchie handle the differentiation between the two categories of THC and non-THC products?
Yes. So to take it one step further, it can be just all in one, like if you only have one location, it can be in one account, and then you have the ability to categorize it, and then there are certain taxes that may or may not be associated with certain categories. So for non-THC products that don't get taxed a certain way, then that can be associated to a particular category.
Thank you.
Sorry to jump in on that, but it doesn't have an effect on the banking side, though.
Yeah.
So if you think about what the bank is concerned about, literally every dollar of deposit has to be traced to a dollar worth of legal goods, right? In other words, their concern is inversion and diversion. So you're selling stuff through the back door, you're buying stuff through the back door. Well, when you're mixing in deposits, so you've got CBD products, you have batteries, hats, that makes the bank's job harder. That's more for them to go through.
So basically, you would have to separate the accounts. Is that what
Not necessarily. You
Okay.
you don't necessarily have to, but if you
Right.
did, that would make it easier.
make
yes.
it easier to do that? So
Make it easier on us.
yeah, sure. So could you, as far as let's say in a single POS transaction or something like that, you have multiple categories. Could you allocate, let's say, the funds received for a THC product go to one bank account and the other ones go to another bank account?
Yeah, it's just the way you set up your GLs. So just as part of your onboarding process, you can set it up in any way you want, and then any transactions and sales that are associated with certain categories, that can just map to whatever GL you want. So it can get set up that way.
Great. All right. So now on to banking. Peter's up.
Who's going to answer this question?
All right. So, what is the current cannabis banking system in New York, and any banks you recommend that services New York?
Well, keep in mind I have a bias here because I have clients and I have non-clients. This is good news and bad news, right? As a later state, versus let's say California, we have banks that have given us some thought and have considered, do we want to get into cannabis banking? So to answer the question, I'm going to say off the top of my head, there's less than maybe 10 banks or credit unions in the state of New York. So on the one hand, there's options. On the other hand, it's not a lot.
And most of them are like small community banks, or like, because they're not really big ones right now, are there?
Yeah, I mean, depends on your definition of that, right? I do think it's changing. That dynamic is changing very quickly, right? So in New York, for example, we have Valley Bank, which everyone has probably seen. They've been very forward. So they're one of mine. And that's a $55-ish billion bank, so a top 200 bank in America.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as recently as 4 years ago, that didn't exist, right? You know, Dime is a $12-ish billion bank. Again, a top tier bank.
And Valley works in New Jersey right now.
That's right, yeah.
So they're open and operating right by New York.
All right, great. And are there any, and all of these are accepting cannabis deposits in New York?
Yes, except that logically, no one in this room has cannabis deposits for them right now, right? So there is this weird issue, right? Like we would call it pre-licensing. So say like me and FL here are going to go apply for a cannabis license. Well, logically, we have no license. There's not even an application to open. But banks will view you as a cannabis business, right? So in other words, if him and I were telling the truth and we walked into Chase and said, hey, we want to open an account for this LLC, we intend to apply for a license, that's a no. So any of the larger, generally speaking, federally chartered banks, bulge bracket banks, they're not taking cannabis businesses at this time. So one of the issues that we're going to have is that, when you're in a pre-licensing, you're aspiring to apply for a license, you're still limited to that same pool of, 10 banks or so in the entire state of New York.
And do you see that changing in the next couple years, I guess, as it becomes legal? Is that going to be expanding?
Yes, very incrementally. So, anytime a new state pops up, we get a lot of people kicking tires, right? New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. But as you can imagine, they don't all drive off with the car or sometimes even get in the car, So the issue will be, so if we put you in a bank right now that is okay with you being pre-licensed, and at some point in the process, they decide, we don't want to do this actually. There's a lot of work. Now you got to find a new bank, right? So,
yeah.
So I'm sorry, the answer is yes, but it wouldn't be like double, right? So if it's 10 right now, it's not going to be 20 by next year, right? It's going to be 15.
Yeah. Okay. When researching a cannabis bank to work with, what criteria should you look for?
Just call me. No, I'm sorry. I think you want to know that they are really in cannabis, and what I mean by that is like, literally ask, right? Like, do you have other cannabis businesses? How many? And maybe they won't answer some of these questions, right? But you do want to know that they are fully in. It helps now. I think that dynamic is changing where you're starting to see some banks actually being public. Valley actually going to conferences with booths and stuff like that. When I started a program, that we used to make people sign, do not disclose, like NDAs, because we didn't want people knowing that we were in cannabis. And I think you don't want that. I think you want to know your bank is with you.
What are the challenges of using non-FDIC banking options?
So I saw that question on the list. I think there's a little bit of a myth going on there.
Yeah.
There's essentially no such thing as a non-FDIC bank. I mean, essentially. Any bank that is out there that is banking cannabis is either FDIC insured or NCUA insured. If they're not, I would say don't do that. That was probably a problem in the early days, when California, Colorado first rolled out. There used to be all these like fancy like offshore options and like we're not really a bank. We're banking with a bank who has another bank. That's really not a concern anymore. And if that is the option you're being offered, I don't think you should take it.
What can a banking reform do for the cannabis industry, and how will federalization of cannabis affect banking?
That's a good question. It's hotly debated, kind of. So as you can imagine, I'm sure everyone's reading up on SAFE. People are talking, SAFE's going to save the industry and stuff like that. And I'm not so sure that's true, because you only have to look as far as CBD hemp, right? perfectly legal, do you necessarily see, raise your hands if you had a CBD business kicked out of a bank. So we know it's happening, right? So why is that? Maybe there's some stigma, maybe there's the concern with the cannabis, which could be solved with federal legalization, but generally speaking,
It isn't, as someone who lives in Canada. Federal legalization makes things worse, not better.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, federal legalization will mean more or less regulation. More, right? So, I mean, look, will it help the situation? Of course it helped the situation. Will it cure the problem? Probably not right away.
All right. All right, so that was our section on banking.
Thank you very much.
He's out. All right, and we have a lot of questions for POS, but anybody can jump in
Bring
on that
it.
as well.
I also have Erica and Jalen. All the tough questions can go to Jalen
Yeah.
in the back there. Wave your hand.
Yeah. So, one of the first questions that someone even asked me, what is a POS system? What is a POS system? As OCM has still not issued metrics program to use to track seed to sale, what general program and company do you recommend? And can other POS systems
That was
like Dutchie?
BioTrack. No?
Yeah.
BioTrack?
Yeah.
It's
is that
BioTrack
confirmed?
today for medical. And then
Is that confirmed for?
It is BioTrack for medical.
They haven't picked that because I know that they're still in debate for that.
I'm putting my bets on BioTrack.
Yeah, yeah. So
like
and
the worst kept secret in the world.
yeah.
You heard it here first,
We don't
folks.
know.
Jeffrey Hoffman has said.
We don't know.
And then can other POS systems like Dutchie be integrated into BioTrack's, or would all dispensaries have to use the BioTrack's POS system, for example?
So POS stands for point of sale, and essentially, I mean, like at Dutchie, we consider it as the heart of your business. You really do need a point of sale. If you're a dispensary operator, it does everything from process your transaction, keep track of how many sales you make in a day, track your inventory, do all your reporting. And then the important part for cannabis is that it integrates with the state tracking system. So whether it's BioTrack, Metric, like there are other BioTrack states aside from whether it's New York or not, and we fully integrate into the BioTrack traceability system.
Right. Why do you need unique tools when running a multi-location dispensary?
If you're multi-location, I think that there's certain things that are necessary from a centralized standpoint that will improve efficiency in operations. So, for example, if you have a catalog of products and you want to sell the same products across the board, across multiple locations, you want that to be centrally managed. But let's say you have 3 locations in New York and it's in 3 different neighborhoods and the pricing is different. So you want to have a system that will allow for central management, but also that location level management as well. And then that trickles down to your permission levels. So if you have a store manager that's in charge of all 3 of your stores, maybe they have access to cash in, cash out for all 3 of your stores and run your reports. But if you have a single bud tender at dispensary 1, you don't want them to have access for the rest of your dispensary stores. Those are a couple of things.
Yeah. Roughly, what is the average cost of a POS system catered to cannabis?
So on average, there's a range. Like we've seen, it really will depend from state to state. Like we've seen the range be anywhere from 600 to, Jalen, like 1,000, like for point of sale only. That being said, everything's a negotiation, but that's roughly the price point that you'll see per location.
Per month.
Yeah, per location, per month. And every vendor will be a bit different. Like at Dutchie, we like the simplicity. It's just one price per location per month, so you know how much you're going to pay. Other point of sale systems, they can charge on a like per register basis. I've heard per user even, which is what like Microsoft and maybe other software companies do. But for us specifically, we're per month per location.
what are the benefits of having a cannabis-specific software for POS?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Vanessa. So there are certain things, like essentially you want your technology to keep you compliant because you're not at your dispensary all the time. So there's things like purchasing limits, equivalencies, taxes, sellable hours, all these things you want to have automated into your system. And those are things that a general point of sale will not do. And these things will just save you a lot of time. And I think in some states, I'm not sure about New York, I'd be surprised if they didn't do this, but you, as a point of sale system, you need to be registered and certified with the state traceability system in order to integrate with them, which often means that they are a cannabis point of sale system.
And your accounting bill will be cheaper if you can run good reports for your accountant.
Yes. Thank you, Nicholas.
So I have another question from someone. As a prospective dispensary owner, and with the extremely limited marketing we are allowed to do, business owners need to find out what customers purchase, where they're from, what's the typical education and income level. And obviously some of these things are not available to businesses, and other key factors that will help businesses find out more about their customer base and how we can cater to those clientele. What criteria and information does Dutchie collect, and more importantly, what information does Dutchie not collect?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
So as far as the point of sale goes, we do have the ability to have certain like membership programs and loyalty programs. I believe legally you do need to have your customer, if I'm a dispensary operator, customer needs to opt in to have their information saved. And through that, whatever information you end up collecting, whether it's their address, their date of birth, that really is up to the dispensary operator. As far as income and what was the other stuff? Like income.
Sorry, income. I guess where they're from.
Yeah.
In education, I guess.
Yeah, that's like census stuff, or I don't know anything about that. Maybe someone like a headset would have that information, or there's also cannabis benchmarks, like those are, or BDS even, I think they might have that information, but that's...
Who wrote the question?
Yeah. Did
No one in here.
Did
No
a
one in
competitor write this question?
No one in here.
Yeah.
All right, we can move on. What is the best way to manage the cash and cash sales, and what is a cashless ATM?
So the best way to manage cash, so at Dutchie, we believe, especially coming out of the pandemic, where people think that, just handling cash, like there's, that's just like a super spreader waiting to happen. We've seen a decrease in people wanting to stick with cash. As a result, there have been many cashless in-store options available for dispensary owners to choose from. So one is called ACH, and that is very similar to like a Venmo or a PayPal, where you would use your phone, and it's linking the consumer's bank account. They pay the funds come out directly from their bank account and then into the dispensary's bank account. The other piece, cashless ATM, that is an in-store solution. You've got a payment terminal, portable payment terminal. It looks a lot like a typical PIN pad that you would see in regular retail. And you use that with your debit card, and it's very similar to how you put in your debit card to take out cash. A typical scenario is that if you are a consumer and you go to the counter and your total basket size is, let's say, like $21, a cashless ATM would round that up to the nearest $5, and then you would get cash back.
All right. And do you need to have an ATM on site?
I don't know. I don't believe so. I looked at that question, and I was looking in the latest like DASNY RFP, and I think the statement was, ATM, TBD, depending on the planogram. So I don't believe so, but that's just what I know. TBD?
Yeah, TBD. All right. Peter, do you have anything to add to that? No, like
No, I just like
ATM.
shaking my
Yeah. They're like, no.
Makes it look like I'm listening.
Yeah. No, sorry, I'm just skipping over some questions because. Is it possible to monitor expiration dates via POS?
Yes,
Yeah.
you are.
Okay. Prior to getting audited by the OCM, how can we make sure that all of our staff and our policies are in compliance?
That's a good question. So if New York follows what other states do, they will normally publish what the regulations are. And then from there, you will be able to see, depending on how nice your inspector is, sometimes you get a checklist in advance so you know exactly what the inspector is going to be looking for. They want you to pass because it makes their job easier. So my advice is the easier you can make it for the inspector, the better off you will be. Dutchie, we've also had our implementation specialist be on standby just in case. But from a tech standpoint, normally they want to see you process a sale, they want you to run a report, receive a manifest to make sure that you are in fact integrated with the state traceability system. The destruction log is a very important one. So what Peter was talking about earlier, that every dollar needs to be accounted for. Every gram and every product also needs to be accounted for. So for example, if you use something for a sniff jar and you destroy it, you need to make sure that there's the proper reason code so it goes in the proper bucket from an inventory and tracking purpose.
What are the general fines if you're not in compliance? Like what your experience is based on other states. Is there a chance to correct the non-compliance and not be fiscally penalized?
Yeah, so as far as the amount goes, I'm not really sure. It will vary by state. Normally for regulators, they do want you, if they've given you a license, they do want you to succeed. So depending on how severe it is, they will often give you a warning from what we've seen anyways, and give you a chance to fix it. And then if you don't fix it, then fines could occur, but normally they want you to fix it versus fining you.
All right, and the last question, what are the most common issues that arise with POS systems in the first month of business?
That's a good one. I was asking our implementation team this. I think muscle memory, they're saying that muscle memory, like the first, it's also you get in what you put out. So when it comes to the onboarding and the training, invest in your team, invest in the training part of your team. A point of sale is the heart of your dispensary, but it will not run the whole dispensary for you. So make sure that whoever your store manager is or your team lead is, you have them involved in the beginning of the training process. And it's just, natural human behavior. You want them to feel part of the process, and change is really hard. So the more you involve them in the beginning, the more they feel like they're part of that process, and then they'll adopt to learning the point of sale and your new dispensary SOPs.
And then, sorry, one more question that I finished. How do we track inventory? Is it possible through a POS system?
Yeah, that's a big component of the point of sale. Yeah.
And I forgot to go back to banking. Any highlights for that you think that is relevant to, understanding, cannabis and people opening and looking for banks and stuff, like anything that you think is relevant today?
Just call Peter. Just be friends with Peter.
Just
Anything
call.
else?
Well, actually, good news, bad news, right? The bad news is that for those of you that have opened businesses before, have set up business accounts before, you're used to a certain way. The bad news is that that's not going to happen here. You're used to sending in 3-4 pieces of paper and then the account's open the next day. Here, they're going to be asking you, 20-25 pieces of paper, and it'll be a month before the account is open. So I would say some patience, a little warning from me to you. The good news is that what they are asking you for is probably what you'll be preparing for the state anyway. So, you've already got it.
When do you recommend people start looking for banks?
Just call me.
No.
No, keep in mind there is a significant lag time, like seriously. I am trying to open an account for the Asian Cannabis Roundtable. I am trying to open an account for the. It's taken me a month.
Yeah. All right. And for you, any highlights that you think is relevant today for anybody looking for POS systems?
I think not just POS, so whether it's POS or an accountant or a banking buddy or real estate or whatever, just to echo what everyone here was saying, you want to really just interview them, ask for cannabis references too. There's professionals and then there's cannabis professionals, and I would just ask them, like, do they, like Peter was saying, do you have any cannabis clients? Who else have you worked with? And you also want them to be invested in the industry and really like tuned in and dialed into the industry. Just ask them, do they, like, what webinars or conferences do they know of? Like, do they subscribe? Like, what newsletters do they subscribe to? Like, if they don't know what MJ Biz Daily is, like, you know, like,
Yeah.
if they don't know who NYC GPA is, then like you don't want to work with them.
That was well done. That was.
It's a good.
But there's a big. I will say though, and you'll know the difference. There's a big difference between a professional and a cannabis professional. There's lots of professionals who want to break into the cannabis industry, and that is okay. But do you want to be their guinea pig? Like, as a dispensary owner, you have your own business to worry about. So you want someone and you want a vendor to work, to be proactive and be the one calling you to tell you the latest rumor of whether or not it's BioTrack or Metric. Like, you want someone that's like obsessed and living
BioTrack.
and eating and breathing this, right? Because it is a hustle. You've got this cannabis hustle. Like, you have to have that. And we talked about cannabis years, but there's like cannabis speed too. And you need someone that wants to win for you.
Right. All right, so now we're just going to open up to the floor. If anybody has questions that we can ask, and you have the opportunity. So, Brent, go ahead.
Just to expand,
Okay.
when it comes to professionals versus cannabis professionals, is it acceptable to pay a premium when you're working with a cannabis professional? Say just the average insurance agent versus someone that specializes in cannabis insurance. Like, you see that a lot, but is that something to expect across the board?
For insurance specifically, we at Dutchie, we just started doing insurance, and we feel really strongly about just having fair pricing across the board versus like you've got your like green tax, just like as soon as it's for the cannabis industry, all of a sudden it's 10 times more. But then again, there are certain high risk components, and that's the reality of it, right? So I would say the best thing is to vet a few, get some references, see how long they've been in the cannabis industry, and then use our best judgment too.
I would say, just from an accounting standpoint, there's a lot of learning. Especially when you're talking about taxes and accounting, there's only so many answers out there, right? There's this whole huge gray area where sometimes the answer might be, I don't know for sure. This is what I think. So there's a lot, it's very research intensive. So when you said premium, but I guess just from an accounting standpoint, there's just things take more time because cannabis is such a complex industry that, yes, usually there's a premium that goes along with that.
Yeah. From a tech standpoint, right, when you see the range where, earlier I said it's like 600 all the way to even like 1,000 to 2,000, and we get people going up to us all the time. It's like, oh, I can use just this restaurant point of sale system for $99 a month, and you get what you pay for. So, apples to apples, it's like, yes, is it software, or do you want to work with someone that has your back, that knows the cannabis industry in and out?
I'd also like to say too, sometimes people think about trying to cut corners and save money, and that's not always the best strategy in the long run. So when you're dealing with people who know the industry, who work specifically with the industry, it's best sometimes to just pay out front that money so that you're not dealing with a last minute problem later.
All right, does anybody else have any questions? Anything? Go ahead.
Just a couple.
Rafael doesn't need a microphone.
So, Ann, what is your average, I think you said, basket of purchase? And then the other question is, urban legend has it that the growers in California only make money selling out the back door. That's how they stay alive. Now, how do they do that with the seed to sale? And then Peter, so I'm only gonna ask one question, it's like 4 marks.
It's okay.
The first one is, you said that banking, you have to trace every dollar that comes in. And I imagine that could be difficult, especially if you're selling out the back door. And then second, on valuation of real estate, the whole issue with improvements and the after value. Is it really valued as a cultivation or processing facility, or is it go down to like the industrial property? Thank you.
So the first part question for average order value, it really depends on the state. You've got states like Oklahoma where the average order value can range anywhere between $40 to $50, which is what I've seen. Whereas in other markets, you see anywhere between $60 to $80. What we have seen, though, we were talking about cashless in-store options versus cash, is that in general, a cashless option, whether or not you're using ACH or a cashless ATM, that average order value goes up by roughly 25%. That's in the data that we've seen so far. And the reason for that is that if you even think about the flow, so let's say you go into a dispensary, you go to the ATM, you take out $60. So you go to the front, you're like, I've got $60. This is what I can buy, and say they ring it up to $72. It's like, I can't, I only have $60. If you use cashless ATM or ACH, it's like, oh, it's $72, cool, here's my card. So we believe because of that philosophy and just that overall customer experience that we've seen the average order value go up roughly by 25%. As far as the out back door, and I don't have an answer for you. I don't know. Just I hope it doesn't happen in New York.
Peter?
Any other questions out there? No, I mean, that's the risk, right? Because otherwise you have a legal business that's licensed, you can check their license, that everything's fine, right? The issue is that it's so easy for inversion and diversion to happen. And unfortunately that's a central tenet of the bank's responsibility, right, to prevent that. So frankly, that is why a lot of banks won't do it. So that there is no easy solution for that, unless somebody came up with a better seed to sale tracking. Business idea, by the way, if anybody solved that. Valuation, that's actually a huge problem. I'm surprised we didn't talk about financing. Financing, capital is number 1, number 2, number 3 question in cannabis, right? Fundamentally, there's an issue where your typical cannabis business does not have collateral. The license can't be held. Inventory can't be held. So that leaves you with real estate. Real estate, however, has a problem where there's a huge cannabis premium. So I get this call all the time. Someone says, I've got this indoor grow house. It's worth $30 million. And I look at it and I say, it's really just a giant warehouse, isn't it? In fact, it's a giant warehouse you've vastly over-improved, right? Now, this isn't unique to cannabis, believe it or not. This is really common in other industries, special purpose, right? Data centers is a really strong analogy. They're just giant warehouses with lots of cooling equipment in it, As a data center, yeah, it might be worth $25, $30 million. as a industrial space, it's worth $10 million. And that so even if you get to the point where that bank is willing to cut a check, you have a valuation issue. A lot of the larger appraisal firms won't write cannabis appraisals. So again, feeds into the same problem, right? There is no CMBS market for it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So valuation is a huge problem. Ideally, the bank that you're working with has some understanding of how the cannabis industry works and can figure out where to pin that tail, right? The reality is there is a premium for that cannabis property as a cannabis use. Can you split the difference? Can you go with the cash flow, what they call the cash flow method versus appraisal value? Ideally, I've seen that appraisal values can be as much as a third less versus a cash flow option. So.
Thank you.
All right, next question. Jeffrey, do you want to hear?
Uh-oh.
Give the mic so we can
Uh-oh.
record it.
Yeah, so
Got a ringer. What's going on here?
when legalization happened here in New York, there was a battle between the legislature and the governor. The governor wanted a very business-oriented.
Jeff, this is a question, right?
I got it. I'll get to it. I want to set it up for you, right? So there was a battle between them, a very business-oriented legalization scheme versus a very social and economic equity legalization scheme, which is what won out. The legislature basically won that battle. We're seeing something very similar at the federal level. My sense is that there's probably a deal to be made on the business issues, getting rid of 280E and getting rid of credit cards, but the Republican Party does not want to give on the justice issues, right? Federally making it so that, Biden can pardon everybody and nobody else goes to jail for federal crimes. I'd like to hear from each of the panelists, what is your thought on this tension at the federal level between a more business-oriented legalization, which I think there is a bill for with the Republican Party, versus what the senior senator here in New York is asking for, which is everything, including the kitchen sink. Thank you.
I'm gonna phone a friend. Erica Woods.
Such a good question.
Wait. Erica Woods is our director of government
Government
relations.
Relations, yes.
So let's give a hand for her.
This feels like a setup, shit. A random person, and then there was a person.
I've never seen her ever. No, I'm just kidding. I talk about this probably too much with Ann, but on the federal level, Dutchie is actively lobbying with both our Democratic and Republican colleagues. We actually feel like you don't have to pick. You can pick something that's both business friendly and addresses social equity. And so we are supporting safe banking. We're working with Cory Booker to find a social equity component to add to it that's incremental. And then we're going to look at full decriminalization as well. So we are fully supportive of the industry and righting the wrongs in the cannabis industry all in one swoop.
Yeah, because when you were talking to it sort of it popped into my head, like for instance, the conditional cultivator program, right? That program got a lot of flack because at the end of the day, not a lot of these conditional cultivators might be social equity applicants, but sort of and I'm not saying it's perfect by any means, but sort of on the back end of that, you have this mentorship program, right? So that's supposed to be geared toward mentoring these social equity applicants and then giving them a pathway to licensure in the future. So kind of, sorry, I forgot her name. Erica. So kind of going off of what you say, I think that's kind of a good example of, you can mix in both social equity and the way to roll out a program. Again, not saying that was a perfect program by any means, but that's a good example of where you can play both sides of it, right? And what was there, like a two-part question?
It's just, can you get to 60 votes, right? You got to get a cloture vote to have any of this happen. So how can you get a cloture vote with the social, with the equity component and the bit? I think there's 60 votes to do a business bill.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not clear to me that there's 60 votes to do a justice bill. And how do we get there?
Yes.
Right?
I agree to you too. Just two, and sort of it doesn't really answer your question, but I always tell people when it comes to federal legalization, be careful what you wish for. I think Peter kind of alluded to that earlier with regulations. You know, if you read that bill, there was also a 15% to 25% excise tax federally. So yeah, you solved 280E. You might have solved some banking issues, but
If I just may, I give that. I will happily pay the 15 to 20% on my cannabis if all the federal prisoners come home. Right? That's what we're talking about here. So that's just it.
Yep, absolutely.
I don't know, Mike said. You can.
I mean, well, it's a hard question, and it's difficult for me because I as an accountant, I support safe banking, and I'm like, having to run payroll and in cash and dealing with things in cash. It's very difficult for me to do my profession. But also as a Black woman, Hispanic woman, I'm like, I want to see my Black and brown people win. I want to see them to come home, and I'm very supportive of the social justice fight at the same time. So it's difficult because I'm definitely split into because my professional side, I'm like, yeah, we need to get this done just so that we can do business properly within the industry. But my heart is like, but there's so much more that needs to be done. So I'm like, I don't have an ironclad answer for you because I honestly go back and forth about it myself.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up. I think a lot of the banking issues will not be solved until there is federal legalization. Essentially, so in 2018, DFS released a memo encouraging state-chartered institutions to bank what was then the medical-only industry, right? They haven't updated that memo. And I think the reason for that is pretty obvious. They don't necessarily, the New York State DFS views themselves as a industry leading, state charter organization, right? So meaning what they say has some federal weight, I guess you could say. But a lot of what DFS can do for a state charter bank has essentially no influence on a federal level. So a problem that comes up, for example, justice-involved licenses, right? So a person has a record, and you're asking a bank to take this person on as a client. So forget about cannabis for a second. This person has a record, and you want the bank to take them as a client. That is a central responsibility of the bank to not bank that person. That's fact. So until we can change that, take that off the BSA, Bank Secrecy Act, these justice-involved licenses are in for very choppy waters.
Would safe banking improve that at all?
I think if it can specifically mention it, yes. But the problem, of course, is that you still have to loop in. So let's walk through the scenario, right? Okay, your financial regulator, your examiner has said, here's your waiver. But what would prevent DOJ from coming in and doing something to this person, to you? Boom.
All right. So anybody else have any other questions?
Yeah, we gotta end on a happy note, guys.
I know, right? That was
Peter just put a little damper on the whole.
Be here all night, folks. Try the veal.
Go ahead, Erica.
What excites you most about the New York market coming online? You've seen many states get things right, get things wrong. Just from what you've seen, is there anything that you're like, oh, New York's gonna kill this in a particular area?
Start with Erica. Yeah, Erica.
I'm excited about the social consumption lounge part of it in New York. I think that New York. It is. I think that New York's strong suit is the party life, the clubs. So I'm excited to see what New York is going to do with that.
Where are we going?
I don't know. Let me know. I'm ready for the invites.
I'm gonna kind of piggyback off of that too. It's just New York's culture, right? You know, you can look at other states, you can project out what you think the revenue in New York State in the cannabis industry is gonna go. Those numbers are all fake. No one really knows, right? But I think, you know, I just have a really strong personal feeling that, you know, we have this culture here and it's been here for decades, right? So, you know, I'm born and raised New York, so obviously I'm biased. So I think New York does everything better. But, you know, so that's what I'm excited for.
So as a Canadian girl that has lost all hope in Canadian cannabis because it's not the greatest right now, just as a Canadian girl, I do really believe that New York has a chance to get cannabis right. I've seen there's cannabis hustle and then there's New York cannabis hustle, and just through the organization, through the association, there's just such a difference where I think you're right. It's just like failure is not an option, and you have people like Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes just like showing up and saying, you know, information is power and New Yorkers come first, and I really believe that New York will get it right. And if, as Dutchie, if we can use whatever knowledge sharing information we have from other states and see how they've done it, bring that information is power, to New York, work with the policy committee at the NYC GPA, make the, like, really show up and participate and have the public commenting period actually matter, like that's what I'm most excited about.
All right, so I have a slightly different take, and actually I heard my man Jay talk about this one time. He was saying, you know, one interesting thing here in New York is that the politicians, you know, especially back then with Cuomo, was not so, forward on cannabis per se. So whether from a budgetary perspective, a policy perspective, it wasn't like all the politicians thought, let's do a cannabis program so that we can do, you know, X, Y, and Z. In other words, the money's not all earmarked, right? They're not counting on cannabis money. And I actually think that's gonna be great for the industry.
All right, well, thank you guys so much for coming and for participating in this. We really appreciate it from NYC GPA. And yeah, I think that that's a wrap. So basically we have some food. Thank you, Vanessa. So we do have some food left, and there are still cocktails you can still order. We're here about until 8, so you guys are welcome to stay, hang out, and we do have some gift bags on the way out that you can pick up. All right, thank you very much for coming, guys.